'50s contact with what passed for UFO people or aliens was pretty benevolent. You met your long-haired Venusian in the desert, and they gave you a taste of what it was like to be a space brother. But with Betty and Barney Hill case, which was the first abduction case to really take the popular consciousness by storm, things changed. The aliens became little guys who didn't look that human at all, and they did kind of crazy things to you, like take you on board their spacecraft and perform operations of a very mysterious and disturbing nature. That really was the turning point in ufological history, because it paved the way for acceptance among ufologists and even among the general public that the UFOs were not only here, but they were here and wanting to do something to us.
The Betty and Barney Hill abduction case, which occurred in 1961 but really didn't come to public attention until 64 or 65 when there was a magazine article on it and then a book, was the first U.S. abduction case that the public and ufologists were aware of. It turns out now that there were many cases before that.
I'm Betty Hill, and my husband Barney and I were the first persons on this planet to be abducted by astronauts from another solar system.
My very first UFO close encounter case was the Hill case back in 1961, which everybody is familiar with by now. That was a landmark case, or it turns out to be a landmark case, because it was the first publicized missing time abduction case. I didn't know it at the time, but it sort of set the standard for all the abductions to follow.
We saw what we thought was a new star in the sky, and at that point it began to move and went across the face of the moon, so we stopped the car to get out to look at it, because now we know it's not a star, it's possibly a satellite. Barney decides to get out with the binoculars and attempt to identify this craft. And he gets out, I stay in the car. He looks up at the craft and he sees human-like figures standing behind the windows, looking down at him, and the craft began to descend. And he got the impression they were trying to capture him, trying to grab him. He ran back to the car. We were speeding down the highway to avoid capture. There was a series of beeping sounds. And then, for some unexplained reason, Barney left the main highway onto a secondary road, and we found ourselves next on the dirt road. Just before we got to the dirt road, we saw what we thought was the moon setting. And you could see the silhouette of trees in front of it. And then the dirt road, we could remember leaving the dirt road, finding our way back, and when we came into Ashland, back on the main highway, we heard the beeping sounds again, and we came home.
I was asked to drive to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which I did, to interview the couple. Of course, this being a close encounter case, I had never come up against one like this, or any before. I was skeptical, although I think it's a good idea to be skeptical when you go into any of these cases. But after I was finished grilling them for 6 or 7 hours, I was very impressed with their story and with them as witnesses.
There were 11 of these beings. They're for purposes of identification. We call one the leader, because he seemed to be in charge, and he was the one who spoke to us in English. Then there was the examiner, who did the testing, and then there were what we call crew members, because they stayed outside in the corridor. There were 9 of them. Now, both Barney's and my exams basically were very much similar. They checked our eyes, ears, nose, throat, took samples of our hair, scraping of our skin, were very interested in our feet. And then with me, they put me on the table and tried to insert a needle-like instrument in my navel. He said it was a pregnancy test. And I said that was no pregnancy test, and it wasn't in those days. It was unheard of on this planet.
Betty, within 2 weeks of the encounter, had had a series of nightmares, very unusual dreams. And she alluded to the possibility that maybe the missing time that they had experienced on their trip home had something to do with the dreams. In the dreams, they drove off the main highway down a side road in a heavily wooded area. They were stopped, and by alien entities, they were taken on board, examined, and then released. At the time, since we had never run up against anything like this, I assumed that the first encounter along the highway was all there was to it, and that perhaps these were wish fulfillment dreams or some such thing that Betty had. What if they had been kidnapped? What if it had happened further down the road and her mind manufactured the rest of it? And by the way, Barney had no recall at all of the abduction at that point.
Particularly where Barney was closed-minded. This created quite a bit of emotional turmoil for him. And he began to having health problems, and anxieties, fluctuating blood pressure, stomach problems and all. And he wasn't responding to medication. So his doctor thought maybe Barney had some kind of emotional hang-up of some kind that was preventing him from getting back on his feet. So he sent Barney in to a psychiatrist who was in the same building he was in. And Barney started going to the psychiatrist on a regular basis, talking about his early childhood and all. And one time Barney went in, and the psychiatrist said, asked Barney, well, what did you do this weekend? And Barney told him we went up in the mountains looking for the spot. So he began questioning Barney about this, and as a result, referred both Barney and me to Dr. Benjamin Simon.
Both of them then, 3 years later, were hypnotized by Dr. Benjamin Simon in Boston, and both had abduction scenarios, as we all know.
This creature, this leader, was telling me something. How? I can see it in his face. Can you see it in you? No. I'm trying to move it. He was just telling me, don't be afraid. Stay there. And keep looking. Did you hear him tell you this? Oh, no, he didn't say it. You felt he said it. I know. I think in my head. All right. Pull the binoculars away. God, give me this fast. All right. Pull it down. Roger. Pull the binoculars down and run. God. If there's a God, give me fast. I gotta get away. Oh. Hey. We gotta get away, baby. All right. Calm down. I'm dying. Calm down. Get away. Calm down. You're still asleep.
I said to him, this had been quite an experience that no one would ever believe me. And that what I needed was some proof that this had really happened. He laughed. Will you come back? Can we work out something? And he said, I don't know. It's not my decision to make. If we decide to come back, we'll be able to find him all right. But I said, but I don't live around here. I don't live in this area. And he said, we'll find him. And I said, how? How will you find me? I'll amaze the people. And he said, you will. We always do find those we want to. And I said, well, now what do you mean by that remark? And he just laughed.
I had a special interest in one aspect of this since my field is astronomy. After one of the hypnosis sessions, Betty drew from memory a sketch of a star map that her guide, or the leader aboard the UFO, showed to her. Actually, it was not a two-dimensional map at all, but more like a three-dimensional hologram.
I don't know if there's an opening in the wall or just what, but all of a sudden here's the map. It didn't pull down or anything like that. And it was probably about 2 by 3 feet. And it was almost, it was so realistic, it was almost like looking at the sky. And even some of the objects even seemed to be slowly moving. He asked me if I knew where we were on the map, and I told him no. And he said, well, if I didn't know any basic information, then it would be impossible for him to show me where they were from. And with that, he put the star map, pushed something, and the map was gone.
The two largest stars appeared to be just objects in the foreground, therefore they showed up large, and these appeared to be the base stars. There were heavy lines running between these two stars, indicating heavy traffic, trade routes. In fact, the leader explained it that way. There were solid lines going out to several other stars where they apparently traveled, and then dotted lines or dashed lines going to others which were remote outposts, one visit to these stars or less frequent visits. Years later, Marjorie Fish, an Ohio school teacher, decided to take the star map and to see if it matched reality, to see if there really was a 12-star pattern like this in the heavens.
Now, later, in the research of the star map, I was contacted by a school, at that time she was a school teacher by the name of Marjorie Fish in Ohio. And we wrote back and forth several times. And then she said she'd like to come here and talk to me in greater detail about the star map. And she spent several days with me, asked me numerous questions. And when she went home, she started building models. She took boxes, strings, and she started out and she put our solar system in the middle and started working out so many light years.
So over a period of 6 years, she built three-dimensional models of the sun's neighborhood of stars, moving ever outward.
And when she had finished, she had almost all the same stars in the same pattern that I had in the star map, except two were missing. And so she wasn't able to complete the research until our astronomers found these two stars in 1969.
She had expected in the beginning to come up with random, easily duplicate random patterns, that they would show up quite often, looking like Betty Hill's, but that was not the case. She didn't find any until the 6th year. And she discovered it by lying on her back on the floor and looking up at an odd angle. The whole 12-star pattern flashed into view. All the stars have been identified, and making it even less likely that this is a random choice. All 12 stars that are hooked up by solid lines or dashed lines turn out to be life candidate stars. They have spectra that are very similar to our own sun. They are good candidates for planets, and the planets in turn would be good candidates for life. So what is the likelihood of finding 12 stars connected in this manner in this huge volume of space with 100 or more stars? And only these are the life candidate stars in this volume, and all of them have been connected as if visited by these intelligences.
Of course, the Betty and Barney Hill case is one of the most significant cases in UFO research in general, let alone in terms of abductions cases. The reason why I feel that that's an honest remark on my point is that the Hill case occurred early enough in the UFO phenomena that the people doing the reporting, Betty and Barney, were not what we would call idea or concept polluted. There had not been a lot of imagery in the field that would suggest some of the things that they talked about. Also, there are other intriguing aspects of the Hill case. Namely, it was done by an outstanding hypnotist who knew his job. Also, the fact that there were two people who apparently gave at least partially independent testimony that was corroborated, and then, of course, the famous star map aspect of the case. The fact that Betty Hill's testimony seems to still make a certain degree of logical sense, and the story flows kind of consistently from one end to another, sets it as one of the real classic cases of ufology and something that is not easily dismissed by the skeptics, no matter what they would like to say.